an exciting time to be alive. I took my 10-year-old to see you about 3 weeks ago, and I said, what did you think? He said, she looks like a president. And I think that's great. I have a bit of a Tim Russer two-part question, so forgive me for that. But you have a $50 billion energy fund, and the first part is kind of a fact check. In the research and development that fund would pay for, have you dedicated $1 billion to capture carbon from coal to electricity plants? And secondly, the research and development that comes out of that, how do we protect America's families from bearing that cost? Is that through tax credits or something like that?
Great questions, and you obviously have such a smart daughter. I do have a $50 billion strategic energy fund, and it is funded by several revenue sources. One is to take the tax subsidies away from the oil companies because they don't need your money to make a profit. They're doing very well. They're very powerful, but we have to stay on this. We were able to pass it in the Congress, but then we ran into the Republican filibuster. But there is absolutely no justification for continuing to subsidize oil exploration and oil extraction and distribution. So I'm going to go right at them, and I'm also going to say to them that they've got to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And because they're making these unbelievable profits, we're going to say to them, you've got to either invest in alternative energy yourself or you have to pay into this fund. Because I think this is like what I said before, the Apollo moonshot. We've got to have a fund that puts money to work in coming up with new innovative ideas that America can lead the world on, and we can create new export industries and employ, as I say, millions of people. One of the areas that I want to do research in is what are we going to do about coal? You know, we use a lot of coal in America. And some states use more than other states, but we have a lot of coal that we have in our own country, but we know the economic and environmental challenges. We've got to figure out how to see whether coal can be cleaner. That's why I do want to invest in some demonstration projects to figure out, is it feasible to sequester the carbon out of coal? I went to a town outside of Buffalo, New York, Tonawanda, which has a huge old coal-fired power plant last summer. And I went there because I was talking about what we needed to do with coal. And we had some professors from the University of Buffalo who'd been studying the geology of that part of our state. And they said, look, you've got the perfect geology to be able to inject the carbon into the ground. But we don't know if it will work because we don't have the funding to try it. So I want those demonstration projects to actually be able to do that. I also want to have a moratorium that you cannot build new coal-fired plants unless you use the most advanced technology to try to get the emissions out of the air as much as possible. And it's not just carbon dioxide, it's mercury. You know, there's a lot of evidence that the mercury from coal being burned to produce electricity is present in higher than acceptable levels in the blood of a lot of women and children in America. So we've got to take this coal issue very, very seriously. But we also have to work with other countries around the world. China is putting a coal-fired power plant into operation every single week. Their emissions go up into the wind stream, they drop in the oceans, they get into fish, people eat the fish, and it's one of the ways mercury gets into your body. So the world is not divided between us and them. We're all in this together when it comes to protecting our planet and figuring out how to work, and I'm going to do that as president. I want to make a commitment that as soon as I am elected, I will start reaching out to the rest of the world to say the United States will be a leader in dealing with global warming. Let's work with China to make coal demonstration projects. Let's work to have solar arrays. You know, there's a lot of research now that if we actually invested anywhere near a significant fraction of what we spend on defense spending, we would actually be able to revolutionize the way we produce energy within a decade. You look at the great expanses of deserts across our country, we could have solar arrays. You look at all the places we could use wind, geothermal. I was at a hospital outside of Burlington here. It's one of the most energy efficient hospitals in the world because it gets its energy from a geothermal source from a nearby lake. We have just scratched the surface. Look at what we could do with automobiles. We have finally, under the Democratic Congress, raised gas mileage, but that's just the beginning. You know, if Henry Ford came back tomorrow and saw one of our cars, he'd be amazed at the GPS and the airbags, but if he looked at the internal combustion engine, he would recognize it because it looks pretty much the same as a Model T. We're not being clever. We're not being innovative. We're not being daring. We're not breaking barriers. Other countries are. They're going much further than we are. They're employing people. Germany has invested much more in solar power than we have, and they've employed hundreds of thousands of people. We are leaving this opportunity on the table. That's why I'm making the case. It's our security, it's our environment, and it's our economy. And those on the other side who you'll hear who say, oh, we can't deal with a different energy model, we'll wreck the economy. Oh, we can't deal with global warming, we'll wreck the economy. If we don't deal with these two challenges, we will certainly wreck our economy. And more people will be out of work and will fall further and further behind.